Church remain present. We don't have with us today, or this afternoon, for the afternoon portion, Alejo or Lopez. We're going to kick it off with a presentation on county-level impacts of the H.R.1 bill. We have a special guest here with us today, Graham Noss with the California State Association of Counties. And we've got our very own Roderick Franks here from Department of Social Services. So we'll pass the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Root Askew and supervisors. Yes, we are privileged to have with us today the CEO of California State Association of Counties, Graham Noss, to talk to us about H.R.1. We were to have another distinguished guest today, Carl Marquez, the Executive Director of the California Welfare Directors Association. However, he was taken away and with busy matters at the state capitol today, so advocating on our behalf. So we're very pleased that Graham has agreed to also share some of the information from CWDA today as well in his presentation. I'm here as the tech guy, so if anything goes wrong, hey, I'm from social services.
Madam Chair and members of the board, delighted to be here today. Graham Noss, the CEO of the California State Association of Counties. And I think what I'll do, I'm just going to look in your direction when slides should advance. And if anything goes wrong, it's because I messed it up. So it's not you, it's me. There's no question about it. First, it's election day, so I want to celebrate that. That's a really important day for democracy. And so hopefully folks are out or have already voted on the many things that are on the ballot here in the primary. I will share some things related to where we are currently related to the state budget in terms of H.R.1. So I will talk about that, but I want to first talk about what it does to the state and to counties and what we've been doing collectively in response to that. And you can move a slide and the next one. So before I get into this depth, I just want to thank this board because this board has been very engaged on behalf of your community at the state level, at the federal level, and that's exactly what is necessary in a space where counties are being asked to do things that this federal and state government either have already said they won't fund or are in the midst of figuring out to what degree they will mitigate your responsibilities that they are placing upon you. And so that takes a lot of leadership and reach out, and this board has been very active in doing so. I also want to celebrate your CAO because she's been a marvelous resource to us. So she makes us better on your behalf and also serves as one of the leaders of her colleagues across the state. And so we have the great opportunity to connect with her on a variety of issues given her role. So really appreciate that. Supervisor Alejo, who is not here today, is our first vice president. So he will be our incoming president in December on behalf of all counties in the state of California. And he's currently in D.C. doing some advocacy and other work on behalf of the county and on behalf of us. So miss him here. All right. So let me turn to H.R.1. H.R.1, we go back to last year, significant changes. In fact, no changes to the healthcare system and to CalFresh, the food support system, in the last 2+ decades come remotely close to the impacts that come from H.R.1. It is massive in terms of the impacts on communities, and so that's why we've been investing so much time and energy into trying to mitigate what those impacts would be, mitigate the harm that is going to occur to communities. And so I'm going to hit on what that means relative to the Medi-Cal program, which is the state's public health coverage program, and the CalFresh program, which is the food support programs. All right, and so those span a few different areas. As we've been looking at what where the impacts are going to be relative to H.R.1. They hit county indigent care programs, and I'll talk a little bit more about what those are and why that's relevant. Impacts to hospitals, and particularly public hospital systems, of which Monterey is certainly one of the counties that has a public hospital here in California. The county eligibility workforce, and those are the folks that actually determine eligibility for the programs, both federal and state programs. And so without them, we can't determine who should be on and eligible for programs, public support, which are primarily children from low-income families. And then behavioral health. There are some impacts that are indirect from H.R.1 that touch on behavioral health in the state of California and some of the responsibilities that counties have. All right. So since the beginning of this year, we have been working as part of a broad coalition, and we refer to it as an all-county family coalition. And that coalition includes the three organizations that represent county supervisors, and that is us representing all 58, the Regional Council of Rural Counties representing 40 of the most rural counties in the state, and the urban counties of California that represent the urbans in California. So it's the three of us, plus it is what I would refer to as the policy affiliates. And so these are the associations representing the department heads that are running public hospitals and social services and the indigent care programs and behavioral health and the public health directors. And so we've all been working together to analyze what the impacts are related to H.R.1 and then develop solutions for the state to consider. All right, so in February of this year, after months of analysis, what we learned was that H.R.1 has an impact on counties of shifting costs of up to $9.5 billion each year. And so that is a massive number, and it impacts indigent care, where north of 1 million people may be impacted in terms of losing access to health care and then becoming accounting responsibility on what effectively is a catastrophic care program. And there's some significant costs obviously associated with that. Public hospitals have a $3.4 billion annual loss of revenue, which then puts a significant strain on the hospital's ability to deliver services and to maintain specialty services that often do not pay for themselves. The workforce, and these are the eligibility workers, many hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of impact in the budget year beginning July 1 and then moving forward as well. And then just referencing that there are other impacts that are occurring that includes behavioral health as we have been looking at this. And so what we've done is we took that and then we looked to the May revision in the governor's May revision, which came out just almost 3 weeks ago, and what solutions might be found in there to help mitigate some of the harm. And regretfully, not very much at that time. And so for indigent care programs, answer 0. For public health hospitals and the health systems, answer 0. For the eligibility work, there is some one-time funding. I would just highlight that one-time funding is very difficult when you actually have to hire people to do the work, and those people are not one-time in nature. Those are permanent people doing permanent work, and regretfully, we're only funded on a one-time basis in part. And there was not recognition of the behavioral health components to it as well. And so where I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this particular chart because what we have put together is an overall budget request of the state. And so this is that all-county family coalition developing solutions which are about trying to mitigate the most harm. So this is not solving the whole problem. This is making things workable in communities. And so there's a budget request, and I'm just going to go to the final table here, the updated coalition budget request. And so what we've done is, following many, many dozens of meetings with legislators, with the governor's office, with the administration, and with a whole host of other stakeholders, we developed first a request in terms of what would be put on the table, and then refined that based upon updated numbers and assumptions at the state level and that we're working off of here. And so that translates to a $50 million request for indigent care, and that essentially would serve as an emergency Medi-Cal for those that are otherwise going to lose all health coverage. A $500 million request to support the public hospitals who are losing a substantial amount of revenue. The county eligibility work is $300 million, and that allows the workforce that is necessary to accommodate what is a more than doubling of the amount of work that counties have to do in order to do eligibility. So it's happening twice as often. And it is happening in a far more complex way, and where the rules for those on Medi-Cal are different than those that are on CalFresh, but we're often talking about the same population. So this is almost an intentional complexity that translates into eligible children and families being kicked off of Medi-Cal and CalFresh when we know that they are absolutely eligible for it. So that's hugely unfortunate, and where this request comes from. And then finally, on the behavioral health front, as folks lose health coverage, they lose access to the early behavioral health interventions that occur. And when you lose access to early behavioral health, issues get worse. And when issues get worse, they then become county responsibility. And so that's what the dollars reflect here. And so that updated overall budget request is $1.1 billion in the budget year. And then that grows when H.R.1 is more fully implemented beginning in July of 2027. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little specifically about each of the different areas, and then I'm going to bring in where we are relative to the budget, because there's some material progress that has been made, and there's more that needs to be made as we navigate through the next few weeks. First is what the indigent care alternative is that we refer to as the PATH program. It essentially creates an emergency Medi-Cal program for those who otherwise are going to lose all coverage. And so that is north of 1 million people here in the state of California, and this would preserve some potential when an emergency would occur. The alternative is there's not a health coverage, and emergency Medi-Cal is not there's no preventive care that is occurring as part of this proposal. And so want to be very clear that this is not real health coverage in the way that most people would imagine. This is how do we mitigate the most harm in a way that also stabilizes public hospitals and stabilizes people and their families. That's all it does. It's a minimum level of care associated with it. Okay, let's move to the next one. Indigent care in California goes way back to 1933 with what we refer to as Welfare and Institutions Code Section 17,000. And so that just means in state law, counties are the provider of last resort. And so that means when there's no other place to go, at the end of the day, each county must have some semblance of an indigent care program to meet the needs of folks in your community. And each county sets that structure up on its own. And so in the past, that looked a little different here than it did in Merced and Alameda and Los Angeles. And it looked different because your community is different, your resources are different, your infrastructure is different. And so there are eligibility criteria associated with that. There's often a share cost associated with that. It's short-term in nature. This is not ongoing care. And so that obligation has largely not been needed for 13 years because of the Affordable Care Act. So those that had been on the indigent care program were moved to what is a full health coverage benefit, and so have been receiving all the preventive care and the emergency care, all the care that has been necessary as part of that. So there's not been a need for indigent care. However, when the Affordable Care Act went into place, the dollars that you had to fulfill your indigent care obligation were taken. And we supported that because it was in exchange for people getting a higher level of care due to the passage of the Affordable Care Act. So it was a workable place to go. But as that now gets unwound a little bit, the money does not automatically flow back to counties. And so your obligation is there, and your ability to fund that obligation has been reduced to zero, which is why we're in this specific place. All right. So there are three types of counties as it relates to indigent care. The largest pool of counties are the CMSP counties. That's the County Medical Services Program. It's been around since the early 80s. Those are primarily the smallest, most rural counties in the state, and they do it essentially as a pooled insurance of sorts, emergency insurance of sorts. There are the public hospital counties, of which you are one. The public hospital counties are by and large the most urban, largest counties of the state, and there are a couple of exceptions to that, and you're one of them because you have the smallest population of counties that operate a public hospital, and so it's a great asset in your community, but it is, as you very well know, not free and very difficult to ensure that public hospital remains open and the care continues. And then there are the Article 13 counties, which are sort of the tweeners. And these are counties that they're not part of this bigger pool of CMSP. They don't operate a public hospital system. And in the past, they had some semblance of a county clinic system that was utilized to meet the needs of their community. In most cases, those clinics are gone. They don't exist anymore. And so for those Article 13 counties, they would need to recreate a whole clinic system that hasn't existed for more than 12 years as part of the implementation of H.R.1. Okay, for public hospitals, I'll just say public hospitals have been under strain for a number of years. There are multiple complex financing structures that have been put in place, some at the federal level, some at the state level. H.R.1 unravels some elements of that, and it makes it far more difficult for public hospitals to fulfill their duties in the community and to do it in a sustainable way. In addition, there are hospitals, and you have some of them, that are not public, and are in more of a rural nature and have been severely distressed and are struggling to keep their doors open as well. And so that's a critical place to go, or that's a critical place that needs some support as well. Okay, I don't need to walk through that portion of it, so we'll move to the next piece, which is the county eligibility portion. So this translates what has been the dollar request of $300 million for the budget and more in the beginning in 2027-28 into what it actually means. And that is, we need an additional 2,000 eligibility workers statewide to meet the new requirements under Medi-Cal so that those who are already eligible can retain their eligibility and the benefit. Because the way that it works is, until you've proven that you are eligible under the new rules, you are deemed ineligible and you're likely to lose your coverage. And so this is critically necessary to have the eligibility workforce expanded appropriately so that you can meet the needs of your community. And that takes time. It takes time to go through the hiring process. They didn't have to be trained associated with that. And so the request is to accommodate that in a way that could be meaningful in your community. And then on the CalFresh side, for the food support, there's 400 to 500 additional eligibility workers that are necessary in order to meet the new requirements that are part of that. Okay, so what we have done is we've split the $300 million request effectively into two different pieces, and the portion as related to the Medi-Cal eligibility. And the reason why that is so much higher than the CalFresh is because Medi-Cal has not had what is deemed a work requirement in the past. And so that is new here. CalFresh has had some element of that. And so this simply recognizes what some of the additional workload and how that'll play out. And I should note that because H.R.1 requires those who are otherwise eligible to be working, does not mean that they were not working before. And so it's important to note that health coverage is very important. Food support is also very important, but neither of those actually pay your rent. So there is another thing that you have to do in order to manage your household. And so most folks are working. The challenge is, in order, under the rules of H.R.1, the families that are impacted are largely in less stable employment. Their hours change frequently up and down. And every time their hours change up and down, it may impact their what the level of benefit is, particularly in the CalFresh space. And so that might be moving up and down. It also, in order for them to prove that they are working, in many cases, they have to take time off of that job, which is hourly, not salary. And then they're taking time off of their job, which is now unpaid, in order to prove that they are working, which seems kind of crazy, but that's the structure of H.R.1. So that's, and the additional workforce and those dollars are intended to help mitigate that to the greatest degree possible. On the behavioral health side, I mentioned these are mostly indirect impacts that happen because the upstream interventions in behavioral health at a lower level will be lost as folks lose health coverage, and then they will come in associated with that. Okay, so, and we can move from that slide as well. What I want to do now is I want to talk briefly about where we are overall in the budget process. The legislature has until June 15th to pass a budget that includes agreement between both houses. And that means it has to be in print by June 12th because there's a 72-hour rule. So today's June 2nd. There's 10 days between today and when the legislature needs to have an agreement as to what is in the budget for them to vote on the 15th. And then the governor has until effectively July 1 in order for a full agreement to be put into place. And so we're right in that period of time. The Senate has already done work relative to what in their version of an agreement is. The Assembly on Thursday is planning to walk through what their publicly in their budget committee what their framework is around the budget. The two are not the same. So that means that when we get to Thursday, there will be two versions of the budget, one moving through the Assembly, one moving through the Senate, that will ultimately need to be reconciled before June 12th. And so we're in a very small window in terms of where we are overall in the budget. And so I want to talk briefly about, I'm going to look at notes so I don't mess it up, but I'm going to talk briefly about where we are overall relative to this, because both houses are attempting to do much more than what was in the May revision of the budget. And so that's very positive. And that's a result of incredible work that has been occurring by this board and others to educate legislators in Sacramento, almost none of whom were around when there was a prior indigent care program. And so it's all new to the legislature, and so it's taken a lot of time for them to fully understand the complexities and the challenges and the immense risks that are being placed upon communities that need to be changed. And so here I go. This is because of my technology. Yeah. Okay. So. As I mentioned, the May Revise essentially had no funding for the items that we discussed, with the exception of the eligibility portion. What the Senate does is it fully funds, actually both houses fully fund the eligibility requests. And so that's very positive. And so the $300 million that is that the All County Family Requests has put on the table is fully funded in both the Senate and the Assembly version of the budgets that are moving forward. So that's fantastic. On the public hospital front, the Senate does not have an investment in public hospitals. They do have an investment in distressed hospitals of $200 million, and that is critically important in this region and in a number of other regions of the state. The Assembly has $250 million for public hospitals in their version of the budget. So that would be very helpful for certainly for your county and the other counties with public hospitals. On the indigent care side, the Senate does not fund the budget, the request of counties associated with that. The Assembly provides $250 million that could be spent over a 2-year period, not knowing what the flow is going to be in terms of how quickly individuals and families are disenrolled. So it's not totally clear how much of that is going to happen in January to June of next year versus July 1 next year going forward. And so there's some flexibility in the way that those dollars could be used. And there is not funding for behavioral health in either version of the plan. But so on the whole, particularly in the Assembly version, it's near $800 million of what is a $1.1 billion all county family request. And so it's not all divvied up in exactly the same way, but it goes a very long way to try to mitigate the most.
Let's take a look here for today's visit. All right, so looks like you've been dealing with some neck pain.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I just want to pause for a moment because you have 2 representatives from your county in the legislature that are critically imperative and have been incredible partners. And in the Senate, that is Senator Laird as the chair of the Senate Budget Committee. He understands counties, he understands communities, and he's been fantastic in assisting and navigating through this. And you're also blessed that the speaker comes from this region as well. And Speaker Rivas has done a really incredible job leading his caucus in the Assembly to a place where most of what has been requested is on the table in what at a state level is thought to be a very difficult budget year. So there is a deficit that they've been solving at the same time that counties as a whole have been asking for a substantial amount of funding so that you could serve as the conduit in your community to deliver services. And so just great appreciation for both Senator Laird and for Speaker Rivas for the incredible work that they have done to try to get us to this point. It's not done overall, though. And so there is a long way that we still have to go in an incredibly short period of time to keep the positive investments in the Assembly, which build off of the work that the Senate did, and to have what is a 3-party agreement between the governor, the Assembly, and the Senate. And so we are in a way better position than we were just a few weeks ago, and a few months ago, it looked incredibly bleak, and there's still a long way to go, but there's much greater promise now than there was before. And so we're thankful for that, and the leadership of this county and for those that represent you has been instrumental in making that happen. There's no chance that these investments would have occurred without Senator Laird and Speaker Rivas. So just want to be crystal clear about that. And at the same time, work continues in D.C. As much as possible to see what opportunities there might be to ease the transition to the degree that folks really are working because they are, and to not have such a steep cliff that occurs where folks get knocked off of Medi-Cal and off of CalFresh so quickly, with the assumption that the working assumption under H.R.1 is everyone is not working. That's how it's structured. And so working administratively as much as possible to have some additional flexibility put in there, because it's crystal clear that they're actually the vast majority of folks that are on Medi-Cal and are on CalFresh are working. And there's been levels of progress in that space, but it has been a mixed bag and may continue to be a mixed bag. The initial rules related to Medi-Cal and how the implementation must work in determining who is eligible or not just came out yesterday. They're 400 pages, so there's a lot in there, and there are things that make it worse, and there are things that make it better. And so we're combing through that and looking to engage further with folks in DC to try to ensure that the lens that people look through is the lens that is about communities and about protecting those in your communities, to have access to health coverage and access to food support when they are eligible for those programs. Like, that's the goal. And so we're seeking to deliver that message as much as we can associated with that. So I think I will stop at that point and happy to engage in any dialogue that the board may wish to have.
Thank you. I'm going to open this up to public comment first. Is there anyone in chambers for public comment? Anyone online? All right, I'm not saying, are you coming up, Eric? Okay, come on up.
Good afternoon. Name is Eric Peterson, and I'm just wondering how much of this is going to benefit our friends, neighbors, family members who are forced to live on streets, in bushes, in parks when they can get away with it, and places like that, because we have a really serious need. Thank you.
Right, thank you for that comment. We're going to close public comment and bring it back to the board for questions. Discussion, Glenn?
Thanks for the presentation, Graham. The range, we had numbers of people losing their care was like 417,000 to 1.3 million. That's a pretty broad range. I'm just kind of curious why that range is. What is your, what's the what drives the lower number? What drives the higher number? And when people go through documentation, get proper documentation, are some of them going to be able to be pulled back in?
So for purposes of this conversation, HR1, those that are not documented are not eligible.
Yeah.
And so they're not eligible federally. They could be eligible if the state created its own program, and there are conversations to do exactly that, at least for the next year. So that's part of the final state budget negotiations. That is an area that is being discussed. It's actively on the table. So unclear where that lands, but there is some legislative interest in trying to solve that for at least for some period of time. For the others, in terms of the range, part of it is a function of what the rules end up being, and so the range occurred before we had a sense for what the rules are going to be, and we just got part one of the rules yesterday, and we're going through them as a host of other folks. And there are some additional rules that are necessary for the implementation. And let me give you an example. Because the question often comes down to, is someone exempt from working because they have an underlying condition that prevents them from working? And so if someone, for example, has severe diabetes or they have cancer that they're working through, historically, they would be exempt from meeting the work requirements and would remain covered. Under the rules that we saw yesterday, that is not the case. And so which would get us closer to the 1.3 million rather than the 417,000 folks that lose coverage. So, which is to say, if you have severe diabetes or you have cancer or any number of things, you are not considered exempt from meeting the work requirements for that fact. You may be considered exempt with some series of proof that you're unable to do the work, and I don't know what that is, because we're combing through what some of the requirements are, but it's not abundantly clear. But the rule is very different than how federal rules have been structured before, where there were underlying conditions that would grant an exemption for someone to work because they are simply trying to survive. And so that's not the case as we understand the rules that came out yesterday. So, which probably means we're closer to the higher number losing coverage rather than the lower number.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that explanation. The other thing, and I mean, this is probably more of a rhetorical question. It's not even a question, probably more of a comment. But you know, I've seen over decades how state, the federal government, both just tend to be imposing more control regulations on what the counties can do at the local level, and a lot of times it's gone through providing more funds, but for programs, but turning us more into administrative agencies instead of designing our own rules a lot of times. But this is one where it seems like we're actually getting cut back, and yet the burdens and the requirements are not lessening; they're actually increasing onto that, which just makes it all the more difficult and prevents us from trying to structure things locally, because every county, every community is different and needs different massaging. And is that a correct observation?
100%, Supervisor Church. That's not limited to California. That is happening across the country. There is a resurgence of the federal government's attempt to try to, in some cases, require more and fund less, and have rules that are very restrictive, and so your local flexibility goes away. So that is occurring at the federal level. It is also occurring at the state level, and in both places, it has been ramped up pretty severely over the course of the last 5 to 10 years, and even more so in the last, say, 2 years. So that's very difficult. What we seek to do is to ensure that every community has the resources, the authority, and the flexibility to do things in a way that makes sense to them. Because ultimately, that's what communities are looking for. And the county is the critical leader in the community to help effectuate that. And so that where your policies might be a little different than they are in another county, but there's a reason for that, and that's why the board sets it in that particular fashion. And we're losing the ability to do that because of the encroachment into that authority from both the federal and state government. And at the same time, the level of funding is going down. And so that obviously doesn't work. And there's a point at which you can no longer deliver services that your community expects, and that the state and the federal government are demanding of you when you don't have the resources to do the work. And we are very, very close to that point on a growing number of programmatic areas. And so H.R.1 is the big one right now, but elements of that are true on homelessness. Elements of that are true in a variety of health and human services areas, and in land use, and in public works, and related to housing. So it's not limited in one sphere. But in California, counties have the most complex and broad set of responsibilities of any state in the country. It's not close. So there are 10 other states that are, or there are 9 other states that are considered county administered, which effectively means the health and human services, or some portion of them, are delivered at the local level. And so that's true in California, and it's true in a number of those other states, North Carolina and Ohio and Colorado and New Jersey, and there are a variety of them. And But for your counterparts in that category, it's not nearly as complex as it is here. And the breadth is nothing like it is here because of what has occurred over the last number of decades. And it's just expanding from that point on. And there are elements of that model that could be fantastic if you had the resources and the flexibility to do it in a way that makes sense. But if all counties are held to the same rules, regardless of what your reality is in your community, it makes it awfully hard to meet the needs and expectations of your community.
Supervisor, if I may, just to discuss some of the local impacts of what Graham is speaking about in regards to the costs locally of indigent care. Of course, these are all estimates because we don't know exactly what's going to be happening because this is all new. But we would estimate about 12,000 persons of the Affordable Care Act expansion group would lose their coverage as a result of the work requirements. As a county hospital system, indigent care costs are estimated at about $420 per person per month. We would indicate that of those 12,000 losing their coverage, about 3,800 would be eligible for indigent care. That translates to about $20 million a year in additional costs for indigent care, which is consistent with the 1.3 million people statewide, with our county being about 1% of the population, and 12,000 is very consistent with that number as well. So the costs, even locally, are very considerable.
Just a point, if I may, to follow up on that. There's another cost that is outside of the direct impacts that we're talking about. And that is when a hospital closes, it closes to everyone. It doesn't just close to those that are uninsured. And so when the ability to fund services for those who are otherwise uninsured is diminished, it impacts the emergency room wait times for every person in a community. It does not matter how good your insurance is. And it also doesn't matter when, it doesn't only impact some people when the maternity ward closes. And there's one of the which is a real thing. In Inyo County, they have one maternity ward. So this is a county with 19,000 people. They have 10,000 square miles. They have one maternity ward. And that maternity ward was about to close and it's really on life support. You have to drive 4 hours, nearly 4 hours, to deliver a baby in Inyo County if that maternity ward closes. And H.R.1's doing that. And Glenn County already had a hospital that closed, and they're trying to reopen it. There are multiple other ones that are throughout the state. And the public hospitals, including your own, that's half of the trauma care in California is provided in a public hospital. And so you shift $3.4 billion in additional costs to those hospitals and give them nothing in return. Their ability to serve as the level 1 trauma center in a community is going to be diminished. And that impacts everyone. And I think that too often we get caught in X government program and Y government program and what that means. And there's a reality in a community that is bleak and it needs to change. And the only way it's going to change is to make clear to the state that you cannot do this on their behalf for free. And to make clear to the federal government, you cannot have standards and expectations that are on the ceiling when you're only willing to fund what's on the floor. Like, that doesn't work. And so that absolutely has to be delivered to folks that are in the state capitol and folks that are in Washington, D.C., because it's communities, it's those in your communities that actually suffer the most. You're more connected to that than any other level of government, and the tools for you to really deliver for your community are being taken away.
Thank you for this entire message.
Super positive.
It is, and it's very real. And I think that it's important. I mean, there are messages that we've heard in different spaces that we sit. But I think that for our community to understand what we're facing collectively, I think for our voters to understand that this is what we voted for effectively, and it will remain this way unless we vote for something different at the state and federal level. and that it's up to us collectively to do the work with CSAC
It's been over a month. Sorry, Libby.
to make clear the impacts that are going to be felt by our counties and by our communities. Because we have folks who do represent us who, if they don't know exactly what the impact will be, they're not able to make those changes. So thank you for making the trek here, Graham, to present this. Thank you for the work that CSAC is leading with our county partners in Sacramento and DC to advocate on these issues. I think that in addition, there was a couple of points I just wanted to call out in addition to the impacts that you've referenced through H.R.1 for Monterey County specifically, where we have a large undocumented population of folks who gained access to care during the ACA healthcare expansion. We risk losing 30%, up to 30% of our Medi-Cal membership. And in a community like Monterey County, where half of our residents rely on Medi-Cal, to lose 30% of those dollars into the healthcare system, it will have all of the impacts that you mentioned for everybody, not just for those who are specifically losing care. We have right now our limited pool of commercial payer population is providing supplementing the cost of care for everyone else. When we lose 30% of our medical dollars into the system, we will feel that in our commercial rates. That will happen, and that's just a matter of time at this point. So, and then as a county, we have a responsibility that we've taken on through previously Esperanza to make sure that we're providing some form of access to care, even if it's not the full indigent care option that's available for folks with documentation status, but an access to care model for those who don't have documentation. And then one other thing in the state budget that represents a major threat to our managed Medi-Cal system right now is this UIS carve-out, which would carve out all of our undocumented, unsatisfactory immigration status individuals out of the managed care plan. So I know that's another one that we're working and watching really closely, but the threats are real. The county's ability to manage our own budget and continue delivering services is at risk as a result of these federal changes. And I appreciate you being here to help us understand, keep ringing the alarm bells, and collectively, I think together we can be a voice of reason and offer some alternatives that will allow us as a county to continue providing at least a basic level of services. So thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Sorry, I thought you were wrapping it up.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I do want to get the opportunity to thank you, Graham. I can still claim the new card. Not quite sure if we pay dues to CSAC or how that works, but we're definitely getting a return on our investment, whatever it is, as a county.
It just went up.
This is impressive, and I feel like we could not have done this alone, at least getting to where we are right now. And we've had those conversations over and over again. We've been, sort of trying to figure out what the impacts are going to be, and bracing and strategizing and doing all of that. But the fact that you've made the progress that you have through the advocacy with the state legislature is comforting. My one question I have would be if there's anything more we could be doing. I know at a certain point it was letters and things like that, but I know that we're sort of past that point. So if there's, and it sounds like we're, that our senator and our speaker are coming through for us and understand the situation at the county level. So just that would be the one question, is if there's anything further we could be doing. But I have a question that is the only one that's truly coming to mind, is that what we're experiencing, obviously, and maybe in different ways, folks are experiencing around the country, and you're advocating at the state level, you're advocating at the federal level. I don't know if there's any progress that you feel like you've had. Is any message resonating with the federal government in regards to the level of cruelty that we are experiencing in regards to these cuts? I mean, this is, I think I've understood over the decades budget cuts, and then we see something like this, and it's so beyond budget cuts, right? It doesn't make financial sense at all. It's actually going to be budgetary increases. And the only way that I seem to be able to characterize it is cruelty. And I just don't know, since it's going to be an impact that's felt nonpartisan, right? Do you think there's progress in regards to the message when you're trying? You said it's been a mixed bag at the federal level. I mean, are we reaching people? Do they understand the impacts, no matter what party they're in, of this legislation? And do you think that there'll be any success reversing some of its impacts?
That's a really good question. The climate in Washington, D.C. is incredibly challenging. And so messaging has gotten through in a number of spaces. The ability to effectuate change is really challenging in this current environment. It's just really hard. And so I'm not sure where that goes, but they're functioning in a different way. And, they get to do that in Congress. Whoever is leading gets to choose that. So that's, all we simply ask is that you do not ask of others that which you will not fund. And so if you're being asked to do something on their behalf, the ask shouldn't be, and do it for free. And so that message is both understood. They have their own fiscal pressures, and folks have a lot of different priorities back there, and it's hard to move big policy through the congressional system. So I don't know where it goes, but I will say, one, your dues are actually that's not happening. But every county has been part of CSAC for 131 years, and so it's not about any of us. It is about the collective. And the progress that we have made isn't we CSAC, like we're part of a coalition. It's actually you, because we're like, I'm just furniture. You are directly representing your community, and so are your colleagues across the state. And so there's no greater strength than the 296 elected county supervisors in California. That's the power. And so the progress that has been made has been about that. And it's been about connecting with your legislative delegation, because you have a very powerful one. And you have one that has a more acute understanding of your reality locally than perhaps some folks do in other parts of the state. And that comes from, that's a function of where were they before. And you have multiple members in incredibly important positions that actually came from counties. That is critically important. And so that work has been done by the entirety of the county family, and at all different levels. And it can't be done without those that are immersed in the details, that are running these programs, communicating that to your CAO, to you as a board, to folks on the outside, to folks that are in the Sacramento Capitol that are writing policy. Like, that has to happen. And it also has to happen from you. And it also has to, it's got to be the whole thing. And that's what has been most, if there's any takeaway that is more positive than perhaps the stark message that I ended with, it's that the power of the community of counties together to have a singular focused message about what is necessary so that you can protect your own community. And that has, in many respects, been embraced by the legislature. And so what we need more than anything is that the assembly version on most of these things, the assembly version get adopted into state law. Like, that's what we need. That will have the greatest impact on your community, will mitigate the most harm. And there's some differences between the two houses, and the Senate has some very helpful proposals as part of their overall framework. But we need collectively enough of an investment by the state that reflects that their budget shows California values and California priorities, which should focus first and foremost on your community. And so that's what we would ask of you and all of your colleagues across the state.
With that, I will say thank you, Graham, for being here. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for letting us know where and how to continue to plug in on this and all of the issues that CSAC is engaged in. We're happy to have you here in Monterey County. I hope you had a good visit and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks all very much. Appreciate it.
So we are just receiving this presentation. No action is needed.